watched the first TV debate between me and Boris Johnson, you'll have seen me hold up these censored, blacked out reports. Pages and pages of censored, blacked out reports of secret US and UK talks about breaking open our NHS to US corporations. He told the country there was no circumstances whatsoever in which his government or any Conservative government would put the NHS on the table. What I have here is something I can reveal to you. 451 pages of unredacted documents and information. These uncensored documents leave Boris Johnson's denials in absolute tatters. We've now got evidence that under Boris Johnson, the NHS is on the table and will be up for sale. The Conservatives said this was nonsense. The documents show that we were right. In fact, negotiations have advanced even further than we feared they had. So now we know, direct from the secret reports, that they never wanted you to see. The US is demanding that our NHS is on the table in negotiations for a toxic deal. Mega corporations see Johnson's alliance with Trump as a chance to make billions from the illness and sickness of people in this country. This election is now a fight for the survival of our National Health Service as a public service free for all at the point of need. So for the want of any doubt, let me give this reassurance. Labour will never, ever treat our NHS as a bargaining chip in trade talks with anybody. We will never let Donald Trump get his hands on our NHS, because our NHS is not for sale.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where we say no coup anywhere with super producer Matt Leck.
Yo.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
On this week's program, Big Wosny Lambre returns. My amigo, my co-host of Woke Bros. We're talking about The Irishman, why the NBA's ratings are dipping, and what Michael Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani tell you about the modern world. We'll also probably say goodbye to Senator Harris. Then we're finally releasing an incredible, epic interview a couple weeks ago with the inimitable Slavoj Zizek. I had a really amazing, insightful conversation with him that I'm very excited to share with all of you. A few things, unfortunately, I mean, as an example, his praising of the record of Evo Morales, in some ways actually even more urgently relevant post-coup in Bolivia. But fascinating, dynamic conversation. Happy to get that out there. Got a gem on life expectancy. We've got another shout out and another focus on what's happening in the UK elections. Guys, you need to vote for the Labour Party if you want to save your NHS. That's the truth. And yes, for those of you who whine and complain, you should vote tactically. But I'm not entirely, I think an SDP might be, an SNP might be a tactical vote in certain places. I don't think the Lib Dems are ever going to be a tactical vote, because I am quite confident they would go into coalition with the Tories for another round of destruction of the UK, just like Cameron and Clegg, unless their ossified social democratic wing was going to take over for their right wing, but more on that later. Bernie Sanders is surging, a steady, smooth surge. He could win the first 3 of the first 4 primary states. PBS just did a almost hour-long special on the Democratic candidates, and he wasn't mentioned once. That's how demented and out of control and simply unreal the bias against him is. But the grassroots army and focus continues to surge. A appeals court in Brazil, a right-wing one, affirms the already discredited case against President Lula, why were they meeting with a U.S. diplomat? What's the OAS doing in Dominica? Is there a resurgence of the far right in Sri Lanka? And how do we understand this global pattern? And what's the only way to fight it? Plus, understanding the Netanyahu indictment. And finally, in addition to the debunk, we actually have an organizer from Colombia calling us. I'm incredibly excited to be speaking with her in the postgame. Luisa Ospina, who's an active member of the leftist Polo Party and a trade unionist. She's one of the organizers of the demonstrations we've been seeing in Colombia the past several weeks. So a very, very, very full show. As always, thanks to everybody who went to Philadelphia. We sold it out. And if you are a patron, you can, until they go on general sale, I believe tomorrow, get your deal for our February 7th live show at the Bell House. So far, a confirmed guest, the amazing Alona Minkowski. And we have a couple of more exciting ones to announce to you soon. Get those fast. They sell out. But first, we have to talk about Mexico. AMLO, Mexico's president, is 1 year in. And his election a year ago was a very positive signal for the world and a significant step in a time of rampant nationalism and extremism, personified by the terror campaign that the Trump administration has waged against migrants at the southern border. Its broader effects across Central and Latin America, which has been, as is always with Trump, an extension and an amplification of the already existing empire U.S. foreign policy. AMLO, a leftist reformer, a moderate leftist, someone who came from the pre-leftist tradition, but who set out on his own in two different political parties, most recently Morena, was elected after seeking the presidency several times, including in one in the earlier aughts that many people concluded and thought was stolen, including himself. This was a pushback against a resurgent far right across Latin America as well, most infamously with the election after the political imprisonment of Lula da Silva of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. Now, from the outset, the press coverage of AMLO has been atrocious, and we fall into the very familiar dynamic here, which is particularly challenging in measuring leaders in Western press coverage in Latin America and the Caribbean. There is a full-throated and almost universal, and I would say universal opposition, which is only amplified in the last couple of years, of any type of left representation in the Southern Hemisphere. That includes social democrats, anything that is even consistently moderately pro-labor or pro-poor. The Western press finds a way to oppose them, and for obvious ideological and in the corporate areas financial reasons, because even a modest pushback can cut into foreign capital interests and local oligarch interests. This stuff isn't that complicated to figure out. During the 90s and aughts and during the beginning of the pink tide, there may have been more of a sense of allowing a little bit more of democratic movement in Latin America. Then you have your valid left critiques. What are the records of these governments? Are they empowering civil societies? Are they respecting indigenous people's rights? Are they really taking on corporate and oligarchic and imperial power? Are they delivering? Those critiques are very important and very urgent, and we recognize groups, particularly in Mexico's case, a group like the Zapatistas that still have an extraordinary presence in that country and do so much and provide an alternative model. However, there's always the utopian, impractical, and fantasy left objections to these governments, which is they're never good enough, they're not radical enough. Or then there's the liberal prissy ones, which is that in an incredibly conflictual, divided, harsh political environments with threats of coups and violence and so on, and political deal-making, that these leaders are not always angels, in the words of Donald Trump. So we need to have a systemic understanding that is allowed to absorb critique and analysis, but still fundamentally recognizes that leaders, and very much including AMLO, are fighting on behalf of profoundly disadvantaged people in both Mexican society, but even in the entirety of the global system, and that we are in an era of aggressive coup seeking, that this reversal goes back to the 2009 Honduras coup backed by the Clinton State Department and the Obama administration, that hybrid warfare is a real thing utilized by all major powers in the world, that astroturfing civil society is something that has been used very effectively, at least in the beginning stages of the Bolivia coup, and that there's a lot of moral perfectionism, naivete, and credulity among many who identify on the left that is easily exploited by, as an example, the U.S. State Department. So let's talk about AMLO's record. He's cut bloated government salaries. He's moved money significantly into social welfare programs. He's raised the minimum wage. He's improved labor laws. He's brought people back into the decision-making. As an example, he stopped a very disruptive airport expansion project due to lack of support from the Mexican people. He diverted money to underdeveloped regions of Mexico. He's tried to change the country's policy towards the drug war and has pioneered the phrase hugs, not bullets, which is actually something that we should take quite seriously. And his approval rating hovers at a bit over 60%. So by most normal standards, this is a first year with some very significant successes, particularly if your main interest is in the actual citizenship of the country, particularly those most disenfranchised. He's mobilized working class people across the country. He's been building railways to underserved areas, and he has drastically simplified the presidency itself in terms of the pomp and circumstance of the office, just as he did when I believe he drove a Volkswagen Bug when he was mayor of Mexico City. Now, here are the problems. The economy is sluggish. International spending is normal, but the domestic is lagging. There's a continued dependence on the U.S. for free trade. And of course, that has led to the incredibly harmful cooperation with the Trump administration's war and terrorism towards migrants. Now, again, he's attempted to maneuver it and soften it, but he's still operating in that framework, and that is still an area that, again, cannot be laid at his feet, but is one of serious and legitimate criticism. He's promised not to raise taxes or increase deficit spending, which of course makes it near impossible to fundamentally redistribute and actually change the economy. Now, back in the positive, he's granted asylum to Evo Morales after the coup in Bolivia. He said Evo was a victim of a coup d'etat and that we from Mexico tell the world yes to democracy, no to militarism. He also objected to coup efforts that the U.S. pushed aggressively in Venezuela. And here are some more things to spell out, drawing the thread between AMLO and Evo, who's so much in our minds right now as right-wing paramilitaries go across Bolivian society, terrorizing people, and the incredible resiliency of resistance networks in Brazil and Bolivia continue to marshal against that country's coup. Despite AMLO's high approval rating, overwhelming victory last year, the American press write about AMLO as if he was almost a dictator, much like they did with the democratically elected Evo. A Washington Post headline says AMLO, quote, AMLO is Mexico's strongest president in decades. Some say he's too strong. Relying on commentary from former right-wing government officials, the WAPO implies that there's something sinister about an elected leader with a huge mandate working to change their country. Similar claims about environmental concerns were levied against Evo. Never a concern for the PAN, the Conservative Party, or certainly the PRI, the old Institutional Revolutionary Party, were made against AMLO. Now, again, are there legitimate environmental criticisms of both? Absolutely. Are there legitimate criticisms from the perspective of indigenous communities? Absolutely. But we first we need to distinguish the grounded and smart critiques from the naive and delusional ones. And then even as we make the smart and rigorous ones, we need to make sure that they are not marshaled by reactionary forces in the U.S. and Mexico like they were so horrifically in Bolivia. The New York Times, The Guardian, and other Western sources are engaging in similar hand-wringing about the weakness of the opposition. Let's remember that this opposition worked so hard to create multiple systems of exploitation and corruption in Mexico, including a U.S.-empowered drug war that has turned some areas of Mexico into some of the most dangerous places on earth, in addition to, in the post-NAFTA world, displacing farmers, operating sweatshops, and accelerating the cartel business. AMLO's trying to create some new paradigms and dynamics in Mexico. It will be difficult as long as he's limited in his ability to fund government programs because of his commitment not to raise taxes, which of course he should attempt to do to reclaim wealth from the wealthy in Mexico who've stolen so much, or to increase deficit spending, which is necessary. In fact, AMLO has been conciliatory to the global capitalist order, but this is not enough for Beltway pundits. And while AMLO houses Morales from a disgusting racist coup government, the American media is turning the same ammunition against a Mexican president who's dared to stand up for the poor. You guys have anything to add?
I mean, it's ridiculous when you see the same script over and over replayed. AMLO has been trying to shift this country, but that's something that's very difficult to do, especially with the relationship of Mexico's economy to the United States, and also its reliance on international finance. So AMLO is in a tricky position, and we don't need to have judgments necessarily on like, oh, is he perfect, or right or wrong? But when you start to see this same narrative being pushed against him, that somehow he's a dictator. By the way, remember, somebody who won an election overwhelmingly, so then his party comes into power and now is governing the country. Somehow that's a problem. And it's a very strange anti-democratic idea that the people can't decide who their own leaders are, and when those people come into power that they shouldn't implement the mandates of that they ran on. So this is definitely something we should be covering as much as we can, paying a lot of attention to, and really pushing back against these nasty narratives, because what they do is they repeat the same lies over and over and over, and Americans who aren't paying attention to what's going on domestically in those countries start to believe them and absorb them and start to think that they're reality, while in fact somebody who was democratically elected with a huge majority is trying to implement the promises that they've made.
Absolutely. And two just other quick things. We have a little bit of time to explore this. I think it's amazing to me that you go back and you think of, I always think of this it's so stupid and crude, but Thomas Friedman, the sort of, he's less trendy now, but just, still one of the grand poobah morons of, the U.S. McWorld. In the late 90s, because we also should honor that this is the 20th anniversary of the Battle of Seattle, which was an incredible moment of protests against the WTO, and a true act, by the way, of global justice and globalization of solidarity and ecology. And you see people in mainstream outlets suggesting that Trump's xenophobic fantasy life reflects the protesters because they were opposed to the WTO, and you consistently see this in the neoliberal media, which is a conflation of people who want a post world, a evolved world, a good world, and ones who want to regress even further than the world that the Thomas Friedman's already created as somehow representing the same thing, because they both object to, as an example, a predatory organization like the WTO. But at any rate, Thomas Friedman used to talk about the golden straitjacket. And the golden straitjacket was what countries needed to do with their fiscal policy in order to participate in the global economy. That's fundamentally and very, he wouldn't use this language, but everybody understood that was anti-democratic. You could have a vote. You could have Coke versus Pepsi. Maybe there was a little bit of, one party was kick you a touch more spending in education. Maybe. Certainly if you were, totally under World Bank or IMF dictate, you couldn't. And then maybe one was a bit more socially progressive or not. And that was it. Everything else was designed to turn your country over to Monsanto or Chevron or Microsoft or whatever. And so the idea that then they turn around and say a guy who has a successful mandate and is doing what people want is somehow anti-democratic is pernicious, dangerous propaganda, and I think we really need to interrogate. This is never going to be a show that uncritically that just says, oh, you oppose the West or the U.S., we support you. I'll say again, Assad committed war crimes, even regardless of chemical weapons uses. Every faction in Syria, as far as I can tell, with the exception of the Kurds, have committed significant war crimes. Putin is not a liberatory force in the world. And countries in the pink tide have made legitimate and their own mistakes at times. We're never going to just, we're not doing that. At the same time, there is what could only be, it is a ivory tower tendency. And particularly when you are talking about whether in the Middle East or Latin America, and you are under siege, and particularly in Caribbean and Latin America, you are totally under siege from the world's most powerful hegemonic force is here, waging coups, interfering with your elections, funding opposition groups, all of this stuff constantly. And the Washington Post and the Guardian and the New York Times will repeat that propaganda. And then sometimes some people on the left will find a valid critique. But even those valid critiques, what organic constituency is it connected to? That's another very serious question. Yeah. Even Nicaragua. People ask me about it all the time. I get the criticisms of Ortega. I really do. But when people suggest that there's a third authentic Sandinista faction, well, what do they represent? It's like, 3 million people voted for Ralph Nader in 2000. I think they were right. Not in terms of strategic voting, but that certainly would be the best expression of my politics. But how much does that have to do with what was happening politically in the United States then? At any rate, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add, because when you hear liberals complain, especially in the Washington Post and the New York Times about AMLO, there's all this talk about the institutions. Let's remember that most of these institutions that were put in place by the PRI and also by the PAN were put into place to maintain a system. Like we made this point a couple of weeks ago on the show that it's not very helpful. It's important to remember that the dichotomy between poor and rich countries confuses a lot, because let's not forget that Mexico had the richest person in the world, Carlos Slim, just as recently, from 2010 to 2013, and they were able to, create a lot of personal financial wealth because the political economic system encouraged that kind of behavior. So now AMLO coming at some of these political institutions that were set up to grift off of the poor, to take advantage of people, to take advantage of working people. Yeah, he is going to be fighting against these institutions, and that's a good thing. You need to recognize that not all these institutions are as neutral as they present themselves to be, and oftentimes have a very specific economic goal towards them.
And by the way, including, I don't know if he still does, but Slim used to have an ownership in the New York Times, I believe.
Yeah.
So, speaking of laundering institutions that might not be neutral arbiters,
no, absolutely,
for a basic social democratic agenda. That's another thing that is just so disgusting about liberals when they talk about this stuff. You are talking in most of these cases. You are not. There is a revolutionary project like Cuba, which did incredible things for people, objectively, and had its mistakes. Blah blah blah. We know all this. In most of these cases, and certainly in AMLO's case, you are literally talking about, can you give us permission for 1 second without funding coups and propaganda and death squads and AstroTurf groups and writing stupid editorials about our institutions to do some type of soft version of the New Deal for our own country? It's disgusting. And they still make Lula a political prisoner. Matt. What's a literary? Yeah, you got something. What's a literary reference for this?
I was just going to talk about Bloomberg and Xi Jinping.
Well, please. We're going to get to that later. Well, we're going to do that for the bad, but I think that that's very apropos. That's a very right. No, but look, Bernie has been terrorized because he won't call Maduro a dictator. Maduro isn't a dictator. He does not fit a proper definition of what that word is. Not a dictator. And incidentally, the things that you might object to that have happened in Venezuela, I asked you to look at them strategically. Yeah, they've cut some terrible. They absolutely have worked with predatory military and narco networks. Maybe one of the big reasons that they haven't been deposed in a CIA coup. Sorry, guys, this is politics. Let's be real. And by the way, look, Xi Jinping has centralized a huge amount of personal power in China. There's no doubt about it. But you could still even argue that it's more of a collective system than an individual system if you want it to be more academically precise about China. But Bloomberg could just sit there and be like, I don't think it's a dictatorship. They do opinion polls. What? There are a lot more democratic operations happening in Venezuela than China, I could assure you.
Did you hear about the guy who IM'd into Majority Report saying that your positive references towards Castro make it difficult to reach out to refugees of Castro's Cuba? And I think about that.
Look,
and
I have been looking to develop more contacts in the Miami cocaine trade. Sorry.
Jesus Christ.
I mean, my thing is like, you look at what happened to Morales, you look at what's happened to leaders in Latin America generally. It's like, yeah, you can't defend every individual act of violence that was carried out in the name of the Cuban Revolution. At the same time, it has longevity. And I don't know, it's a difficult world we're living, but I would say maybe the best audience for TMBS isn't those parents.
It isn't, well, but I ask. I mean, it's so funny because I don't like woke scolds. I don't like black or white moralists, and I don't like. Look, if somebody said Fidel Castro created a utopia and he never abused people's rights and they didn't suppress books and they didn't, by the way, until quite recently, relatively speaking, have some atrocious policies on AIDS and gay people, and people weren't silenced because of what they thought. And that's something obviously I oppose. And some people who fled, not all of the people who fled were, Batista oligarch CIA gangsters. Of course, there were innocent people who fled. I can acknowledge every single one of those things. And at the same time, and of course that I already know there's a certain contingent that get all triggered by that. But then on the flip, can you acknowledge that that Che was in Arbenz's Guatemala right before, literally on behalf of a fucking banana company, we had this terrorist coup backed by the CIA that they tried to kill Castro like upwards of hundreds of times using the mafia, the CIA. I mean, that, and also, by the way, that US backed regimes like in the Dominican Republic or Haiti delivered absolutely nothing for their people.
Oh yeah.
And had worse human rights abuses in terms of the imprisonment, torture of opposition, and so on. And that the Cuban Revolution and Castro represent hope for a big part of the world, because literacy, healthcare, and because a little island fought off U.S. imperialism, sent amazing troops to fight for liberations in Angola and South Africa, and even when they were totally marginalized in the 90s, was still just a voice against a hegemonic world system that destroys people's lives on a daily basis. I just want to acknowledge all of that. That's all I want. That's all I want.
I'd also just add that Castro was a critic of Castro, even up until
absolutely.
At the end of his life.
If you read anything.
Yeah, he really, especially towards the end of his life, he really went through a lot of the, early mistakes of the revolution and gave clarification for it. I mean, obviously it's coming from him, but this was a society that was literally had an imperialist power at war with them from the get-go. So you don't make good decisions when you're always, at threat of just being completely annihilated.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not being flippant about Venezuela, right? What would you do? What would your strategic position be? Right. And then look, there's a whole other conversation. I mean, Eva Gollinger, who's amazing on this, she says, look, there was a lot of pre-existing state apparatus for corruption, which was never cleaned up and is a systemic problem. There's a reliance on oil, which is a systemic problem definitionally in terms of scarcity of resources and global ecology. And at the same time, you have, at least under Chavez, you've radically cut poverty. You've really improved the lives of a lot of people. You know that since at least 2002, the United States has been trying to remove you. You know there's a massive band of oligarchs that will remove you. And then you have a military. Well, what do you do? I mean, honestly, like, these are real questions. They aren't just like, I think these are some real questions in the context of the United States. I mean, I think, yeah, like, I think that some of the things around how the Democrats, obviously mainstream Democrats, are so empowering of the intelligence and defense agencies and have used this process against Trump to support some incredibly bellicose policies in Eastern Europe is dangerous to the extreme. And at the same time, yeah, on a relative political level, this guy needs to be destroyed politically. So how do you work in alliance with people? What's strategically effective? What isn't strategically? I mean, politics is always an interplay between these things. And what I find is that a lot of people, some people go to either purely strategic groups, and that's a problem because they have no compass, or people are all compass with no strategy. But then the other problem is that then it's, compass for one thing, and there's no critical awareness of anything else. And that's increasingly the case, that you just can't say, people get triggered by a critical comment about everything, including, examples that are just embarrassing, right? Like, I think it's urgently important in the United States that we have a way more smart and sophisticated conversation about Iran, China, and Russia, that have a much deeper understanding of how those places work, what their legitimate grievances are, and what their successes may or may not have been. Now, if you think that those are anti-imperialist socialist utopias charting us in a just, ecologically balanced world, you're fucking delusional. Period. And I'm not going to indulge it. And at the same time, if you think, I just need to get rid of Trump, or that the United States isn't the most dangerous hegemon on earth, you're fucking delusional. And so I think what we're trying to do here, and the reason things like the pink tide are so important, is that we're trying to find these alternative vectors of power where they legitimately exist. And Castro and the Cubans are definitely one of those.
I would say,
if you can't see that in the historical scope, I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
I would challenge any of the IDW platforms to have this sort of conversation about this topic and see what sort of content they produce.
Talking about ideas. All right, let's get to the shout out. Shout out. Speaking of
my brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas. The dial of ideas. I like talking about ideas. High level. The exchange of ideas.
Shout out.
High level. Still in recovery mode.
Looking forward to sharing more ideas.
Shout out goes to the UK Labour Party. If you're in the United Kingdom, you need to be hitting every single cylinder for the Labour Party. Their manifesto is one of the most dynamic expressions of 21st century democratic socialism I've ever seen. And if you're not voting for them, you are simply screwing yourself. This is a great ad that they just put out explaining how wealth works in that country under the Tories.
Hello there. There's been a lot of talk recently about taking Britain's railways back into public ownership. I'm here to tell you why that's a bad idea and why a private system is the right way to go. Not many people know this, but the UK taxpayers pay 6 times more in public subsidies than they did before privatisation. In just over a 5-year period, Virgin's West Coast Main Line received $2.7 billion in subsidies and yet kept $500 million in profits. Wonderful, isn't it? Government invests taxpayers' money on rail infrastructure, like trains, tracks, tunnels and bridges, all that necessary stuff. We, however, get to run the things that make money, like train tickets and food. So the taxpayer pays, the passenger pays, and we collect.
Your crown, sir.
Lovely. Because of the fragmented rail system, we can make the buying of tickets far more complicated and therefore expensive. A study of cross-country tickets found that passengers could have saved £85 if they bought single tickets along the same route. And all those little extras mean more money in the bank. In 2011, Great Western Railway still had 3 years left on their lease and owed over 800 million to the government. They decided rather than pay the money that was owed, they would walk out on their contract. The Tory government was so keen to let them carry on, they reduced this debt to just 32 million.
Excellent swing, sir.
How amazing is that? Train companies can make a ton of money, yet we aren't doing anything that the public can't do themselves. After yet another company walked out of its contract, East Coast Main Line was put back into public control. It was a huge success, but thankfully the Tory government put it back into private hands. Now that was a close one.
Chew your food for you, sir.
As you can see, privatisation has been great for anyone who runs a rail company or has shares in a rail company. And with the Tory government wanting to privatise even more things, like the NHS, this gravy train will run forever.
Ready, sir?
It's amazing. If you are not voting for Labour, you are such a sucker. It's literally embarrassing. All right, unless you're a billionaire. All right, let's play this. This is funny. This just happened with Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn's great.
That was really super. Oh, very nice. What did it say?
We got a head on the
It's bad language. I can't that was really...
The chain says, fuck Boris. But I think Corbyn clearly enjoyed it. All right, let's do this. David, let's do a gem, and then we're going to get to the pitch before we get to Woz. And then we got Slavoj Zizek, man. This is just jam-packed
show.
Guys, this is a mistake of mine. We should do it much earlier in the episode. So patreon.com/TMBS. But we'll do the full pitch in a minute. Gem time.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this study that just came out. Y'all might have seen it, but I just want to give a little bit of context because it's really jarring. A study that just came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association titled Life Expectancy and Mortality Rates in the United States, 1959 to 2017, found something very frightening, that the United States has the worst midlife mortality rate among 17 high-income countries, despite leading the world in per capita spending on healthcare. And that's from USA Today. So this is something that's very frightening because, we talk a lot about, lack of access to healthcare. But this very specific increase in mortality rates for people in their prime working ages is certainly very frightening, because it certainly highlights people not having access to healthcare, but it also means that people are under immense amounts of stress. They're forced into unhealthy habits because of their workload, and there's the really frightening and sad reality of deaths of despair, where people don't have economic options and they're just so crushed by debt and just the weight of living that they're falling into alcoholism, suicide, drug overdoses, and it's becoming such a factor that we're actually seeing the life expectancy in the United States declining. I mean, really imagine that when we're talking about a country that has now exceeded any other nation in history for the amount of wealth that's created here, that life expectancy is actually going down. I mean, it means that we have a fundamentally broken system, and it's a really sharp break off here. Like, for most of United States history, life expectancy has been rising. So for the past 60 years, life expectancy has been rising. But in 2014, it started to decrease. And the major contributor to that has been this increase in mortality from specific causes like drug overdoses, suicides, organ system diseases, and a lot of these come from alcoholism, drug overdose, smoking, obesity, unhealthy habits that people use to cope with like the pain of getting by. So from 1999 to 2017, midlife mortality from drug overdoses spiked 386.5%. I mean, we're talking a massive shift, in the health of people and also their own mental well-being. Deaths from hypertensive diseases increased by 78.9%, and those linked to obesity increased by 114%. And suicides, unfortunately, have also risen 38% and have actually climbed to 50.9% amongst those between the ages of 55 and 64. So yes, certainly, not having access to healthcare is a major problem for people. But when you look at the causes of a lot of these deaths, they really are driven by the overall stress and pain and suffering that a lot of people are dealing with. I mean, a lot of this has to do with the fact that if you have financial hits in this country, your life really can be ruined. Right. We don't have access to any kind of social safety net. Most families have just been completely decimated by the financial crisis. Meanwhile, the wealthy have been bailed out. All of their money has come back, but people who lost their wealth that was in houses, which for most working class people is the only wealth that they have, they still haven't recovered, and it's been getting much worse. And unfortunately, it makes sense when you look at the reality. There's a Brookings Institute study that just came out that 44% of American workers between the ages of 18 and 64 are working low-wage jobs, which they defined as people whose median incomes are $18,000 a year. So when we talk about, one, the state of the economy today and also questions of employment numbers, we really need to recognize that it's not just enough to pursue full employment. We really need to be talking about the quality of these jobs. And so many American people, as that study just showed, are working full time and they can't get by. And our system has become so predatory on poor people that, the stress that they're dealing with is literally killing them. So, we talk a lot about capitalism, but and how horrific it is and how inhumane it is. But for most working people, we really are going through a life and death struggle, not just in our fight for healthcare, but also just for a decent life where we can live healthy lives, surrounded by community and people we love. People are losing out on that opportunity, and we really need to fight as hard as we can, not only to fight unemployment, but also to increase the living standards of all American workers and all workers across the globe. That comes from decommodifying as much of life as possible. That comes from fighting for wage increases. That comes from higher unionization. And it also comes from making it so clear to as many people as possible that capitalism not only is a system that extracts value from our lives, it actually extracts our life force from us and is killing people all across this country.
Exactly. All right, let's do a pitch. There's nothing really to add to that. It's devastating and it's true, and that's right. Capital is not just abstract what capital destroys. Everything that's solid melts to air. From your favorite baseball team to your heart. All right, guys. Big goal reached last month. We went over 3,000 patrons. And we need to keep powering through. Obviously, the next goal is 4,000 patrons. So help us get there and really reward yourself. There's just an incredible amount of content. We'll probably do a heavier, more elaborative one next week. And you also get things like the Slavoj Zizek interview early, or the Adolf Reed interview, and other big things that we have planned. Patreon.com/TMBS. If you have any problem, there's always, the beginning of the month fall off. So help make up that gap. Jump into the game. If you need a deal, let us know. If you have any card problems or anything on the system, keep working with it. Sorry, there's not much we can do about that, but they will eventually figure that out. Patreon.com/TMBS. Become a patron today. Grab your ticket. If you are a patron, you have a deal that you'll have for at least the next 24 hours to the Bell House at the for the February 7th Michael Brooks Show live show. Philly was amazing. These live shows get better and better. We're taking it back home. We're excited to be in Brooklyn. Alone is confirmed so far. We'll have another couple people, which I know you're going to actually be really excited about. You already buy your ticket? Off mic patron viewer. They're off camera, off mic patron visitor. You're going to buy your ticket probably during the show. He's actually, I was messing around. He's literally buying the ticket right now. That's awesome. We're really excited about it. I want to just also, and then the other thing. So look, for the amount of people that watch all this content or listen to it, we want to even increase the percentage even more, obviously, of people who join the whole thing. It's how the thing is possible, including this full-length show. And you still get at least 2 pieces of additional content a week. And this show takes a hell of a lot of time and effort and research to produce. And then you got, of course, the post game, which is really a full show. And then the Sunday episodes, which are deep and only getting deeper. So do it. Jump into the game. Another stat I found out, something like 40% of you that watch on YouTube, I think that's literally the number, watch our videos but don't subscribe. Don't do that. Click subscribe. We want to get to 100,000 subs on YouTube. That's a big goal to hit. And we're starting the month at over 90,000.
Yeah, show some commitment.
Show some commitment and hit the bell, because we do these live streams, and I do a couple of additional live streams a week where I do primers on either an idea or a book, and then I do news roundups and I take your super chat questions. The next one's going to be on a really interesting book by the French philosopher called Bruno Latour called Back Down to Earth, which is a very interesting essay that has a lot of it's kind of an ecological way of thinking, which has a lot of sharp critique of both certainly the fascist Trumpian Brexit right, but also a lot of mistakes the left is making. Guys, patreon.com/TMBS. And I want to talk about one other thing. Joshua Kahn Russell is somebody that is a great friend of mine and somebody that we've all learned so much about, and he's going to be back on the show very soon to do a lot more content with us. And if you know from watching and listening to Joshua, he's a master organizer and strategist, and he is somebody who is is the executive director of an organization called Wildfire Project. Wildfire Project has helped facilitators, trainers, and organizers across every major area: climate, indigenous rights, black liberation, and also immigration as well as the queer community. And in the way, though, that, as you know, there is an underlying systemic vision here and serious analysis of the world that's material, that actually also has like a strong organizational cultural aspect, which is so important if you hope to actually achieve things. I'm going to just read a little bit of what he sent me. Today is Giving Tuesday, and while we can all scoff at these manufactured themed day, it's still a good opportunity to reflect on how we can give material support to social movements. I want to give you a pitch to support Wildfire Project, a truly innovative movement support vehicle that works across sectors to help the left transform. Wildfire builds the power of frontline grassroots groups and threads them together, from climate justice to indigenous sovereignty, housing justice to worker power, black liberation to immigrant rights, queer liberation, and youth movements. Wildfire doesn't just work at the interactions, it forms long-term partnerships with key groups, pushing our movements forward, helps align their strategy and vision, and supports them through the trauma of repression and innovation of being able to adapt to rapidly shifting political terrain. Since Wildfire is both radical and pragmatic, it really needs the support of grassroots donors. It certainly does. And again, you'll be hearing a lot more from Joshua Kahn Russell. If you're new to the show, look him up. Look at the video we did where he used The Simpsons to teach us how to organize. Check this link out here. This is the donate page on Wildfire Project. I do it. If you have a little bit, you should help them as well. I wanted to, expand the circle there. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with Big Woz, Wosny Lambre of The Athletic, and my co-host on Woke Bros. This is the Michael Brooks Show. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Very excited. So look, for people who miss Woz, as of course everybody misses Woz when they don't get to see or hear him for a while, we do Woke Bros once a week. Go to the Bomb feed on your iTunes app. That's Black Opinions Matter. Click subscribe, and you will hear us every week, except for tomorrow, because Woz is traveling, so Nando Vila is going to be my Woke Bros sub-co-host for tomorrow, which is going to be a lot of fun. But that being said, Big Woz, Wosny Lambre from The Athletic, Count the Dings, and Woke Bros. It's been way too long. Welcome back to TMBS, man.
Yo, what's going on, Mike, Matt, Dave? Good to be with you guys again, man.
Hey, Woz.
What's up?
These guys, we haven't seen you since you had this, you were a little uptight on stage in LA.
Very reserved.
That was quite the night. Yeah, maybe he had one too many IPAs, but it's all right. We enjoyed ourselves.
Oh, we definitely enjoyed ourselves. Everybody, I gotta say, I gotta plug patrons. Watch the LA Live show for Woz and his element.
Right, I'm no longer a New Yorker, man. You know, I'm a big Angelino now, man. I'm fully bred. I'm 2 years in now. I don't own any Timbs, because I don't need them. And yeah, I'm just embracing kale juice.
Yep.
You know, vegan tacos. It's incredible.
Kale juice with with tequila. Actually, I remember. You know what part I loved was when. This is the line that always sticks with me. It was at the end when you were really in your element. And I got to say, it was awesome and honestly exactly what I wanted. And you looked at me and you said, you know what's great? Is that Mike's like my friend, so he can't get mad at me for fucking up his show.
Well, that's the perks, right? It's sort of like your family.
Right, exactly.
You can't do anything about it. Sure, your uncle's a drunk and he probably hits his wife a little bit too much, but he's still going to get invited to Thanksgiving.
Right, exactly. That's, you know what? That's the perfect analogy. It just occurs to me that now with Mike Bloomberg running for president and Rudy Giuliani, like some type of like demented Goodfellas extra with this whole Trump crime shit, that we have these two New York mayors. So one New York mayor was the hard right, definitely capitalist, neoliberal, police brutality, gentrifier, ethnic politics, which describes both of them. But you had Giuliani coming in, race baiting Dinkins, slashing up the city, and then terrorized it enough, made it unequal enough, and then Bloomberg comes in. Bloomberg's, then we're going to turn New York into a big rich people playground. I don't know how to put this, but I just feel like there's something that's so disgusting, but something that's so right about these two particular individuals being on the stage they're at now and basically between them pretty much telling us everything that's wrong with everything.
Yeah, you know, the thing about Giuliani, what's so funny and ironic is that he's probably going to get locked up, but he made his bones as a cop, as a lawyer,
yep.
Right? Like, and he made his bones prosecuting the mob, and he came out of the 70s and 80s New York, and I think, you know, in a lot of ways, his tenure as mayor was reactionary. It's like, we need to clean New York up. It's been decades of crime and just, you know, just filth, and we got to get the subways right. We got to do this, and he's of that. And that was very much his rep, right? Like, I clean New York up. I civilize those savages in the poor neighborhoods, and you know, that's kind of what he got famous for, rightly or wrongly, right? Crime all across the country, not just New York, has universally went down. Like, there's arguments and valid ones that can be made that he really has nothing to do with the crime downtick, that he's just right place, right time. And so, you know, he's very much of that time in New York, and America in general, right? It's just a less dangerous place than it used to be out here. And of course, like you mentioned, Bloomberg is current New York, right? It's coffee shops on every corner. It's, you know, I want to do this West Side Stadium, no matter how stupid it actually is as a plan. Mm-hmm. It's all these frivolous things that Giuliani might not have got done, the real stuff, but that's what he staked his claim on. Bloomberg was just like, and like we always talk about, he's the worst kind of liberal, right? Like, he's uber rich and he's into the nanny state, which, like, who wants that? Who wants the no
It's
more
like yoga that's bad
soda?
For your heart. Am I right? LA reference.
Right, but who wants
kale juice that makes you fat?
State guy. It just makes no sense to me why this guy would think that he has a constituency anywhere.
What did you think when he decided to run?
I just thought about the show Succession. I don't know if you guys are watching it, and what I love about that show is it just shows you that, like, literally the uber rich are the worst people in the world, right? Like, that's the point of the show, is like, these are the worst kinds of human beings that exist, right? They exist basically to feed their own ego. They have no connection to normal people or any sort of normalcy, and that's Bloomberg. Like, he's Connor running for president. Like, that's what he is. Like, nobody actually wants this guy, but he can afford to. And he's obviously a really insecure guy, and this is a way for him to feed his ego. Because nobody's like, oh my God, I need Mike Bloomberg. Like, nobody's ever said that before. But, he's rich enough, he can afford to throw literally hundreds of $1 million at this for essentially nothing. Like, he's not going to win. He has no chance. And I want your listeners to, like, and your listeners are actually savvy enough to understand this. Like, Michael Bloomberg has no chance of winning. Like, he's not going to win. Under no circumstances can he win this nomination for a myriad of reasons. But he's going to run anyway. He's going to waste a bunch of money doing it. And it's mainly because, ironically, he disagrees with the wealth tax. Like, it's right. Like, he's going to waste hundreds of millions of dollars because he disagrees with the wealth tax. Like, you can't make this shit up.
What do you think of, actually, let me tell you, here's my favorite conspiracy theory that I've heard in a long time. I don't even remember where I heard this. You ready for my favorite conspiracy theory?
Yeah, shoot, I'm here for it.
Giuliani went after the Italian 5 families when he was a prosecutor because he was already, now, you know that I'm a Russia skeptic in many ways. However, some people push it too far in the other direction. Regardless, I don't care. I don't believe this one, but this one is awesome. He bagged money from Ukrainian and Russian gangsters to take out the 5 families to make way for their New York reign. Favorite conspiracy theory I've ever heard. That's awesome.
That would actually fall in line with what you know about the history of New York and law enforcement, right?
That's also true.
The funny thing about NYPD that never gets brought up. It's like, oh, blue lives and this, we love the cops, we're so persecuted and blah, blah, blah. Like, bro, you guys have a history of corruption and crime in your freaking, institution. Like, this is documented. Like, cops have gone to jail for it. Mobsters have gotten popped for it. Like, uber corruption all up and down the justice system in the history of the NYPD and the New York City justice system. But it never really gets presented that way, right? We never hear that version of the NYPD in the media. But that wouldn't surprise me. That actually would fall in line with the history of New York City's justice department.
What do you think of Kamala Harris dropping out?
Well, like
exactly.
She's been polling in the single digits for months now. You and I have talked about this on Woke Bros plenty of times. Like, the reason why people stay in the race, even after it's clear that they no longer have a shot, is because, they want to write a book and it keeps their name up there, and they can profit off of staying in the race. And, now that her staff is jumping shit, because and we don't even need to get into the swine that is political consultants, but those people are jumping shit for a new person to fleece and steal money from. So she really had no choice in this. She knew she wasn't going to win for months.
Did you know though, that she would do that? Like, I'm sorry, I missed that. Did you know that she was going to do this? Like, did you predict that she would just be like, everybody who knew anything from the beginning was like, her record as a prosecutor is horrific, and she didn't have any systemic, she didn't say like, hey, I destroyed, participated in this really, predatory, classist and racist institution. Here's how I'm going to change it. That's one path. Or, or even double down on it. I mean, she didn't have any answer to it. I mean, so there's a substantive reason. But then I think there was also just like, and I'll count myself among these. I thought she was going to be very charismatic and very formidable, and then she just ended up being kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but not formidable.
Well, so the problem for her is that she's a woman sort of out of time, right? Like, she missed her time.
Right.
If you want to be an ascendant candidate within this version of the Democratic Party and, you know, the party's base and where the energy is leaning, it's leaning towards the left. It's leaning towards progressivism. And you can't be an ascendant cop. You can be a celebrity jerk who voted for the crime bill and, you know, has all types of ties to the financial services industry like Joe Biden, but he's already a celebrity. He's already got name recognition. He doesn't have to run on his record. He can run on his name.
Right.
Kamala Harris never had a name, so she had to run on her record. And her record in the climate in 2019 Democratic Party constituency is that of a bad cop, quite frankly. It doesn't matter that you're a woman or that you're black and that we happen to like those things nowadays in, you know, 2019 Democratic America.
Right.
Like, we have, those things happen to be in vogue these days, but you don't have the name. Nobody knows you. And so, therefore, all you can run on is what you've actually done, what you've actually accomplished. And those things don't jive with where we are as a party and as a progressive people.
Switching gear, I think, I agree. Switching gears a bit. Why are the NBA ratings dipping? And does it have anything to do with the Hong Kong China thing or not at all?
No, I don't I don't think the Hong Kong China thing, you can take that isolated and say this is part of the ratings dip. The ratings have been dipping for a few years now. Mm-hmm. But the NBA is dealing with a myriad of problems, right? For whatever reason, the NBA insists on putting franchises in like B-level cities as far as market size. I'm not talking about the quality of your city, Memphis. If we have any TMBS people in Memphis, and or
they're in Memphis, they're great,
New Orleans,
and their city's wonderful.
You know,
I'm sure there are in
great
Portland.
cities,
much love.
But market size, when you consider like there's no team in Seattle, but there's a team in Oklahoma City, so they have a market issue. That's a one. Two, I think, you know, quite frankly, when you're the NBA, you're constantly dealing with a race problem, right? Like inevitably, you are selling a black sport to a predominantly white audience, and that's gonna. It's always an uphill climb with that, right? Like, this is still America. I know, I know I'm a genius for saying that, but like, this is still America, and it's still complicated to sell the NBA to people. And, you know, quite frankly, I think the cord cutting in cable goes hand in hand with this. You know, with a majority of their games being broadcast on Turner and ESPN. So it's just a myriad of factors coming in. Plus, like, we're ushering out one era when it comes to LeBron and them, and ushering in a brand new one. So the audience is getting used to new guys. Also, Mike, for whatever reason, white Americans just can't get with European players. You know, like, they just, like...
Isn't that actually... Like, that is super... I was going to say that. I think that's really interesting, right? Because...
Yeah, they don't go for it.
There is the NFL, like... I feel like the NBA and you know, the China, like, obviously, look, at the end of the day, this is all capitalism, so let's be real. But the NBA clearly accepts, and, you know, there's the Nike ad that points to Black Lives Matter. There, you know, there, like... The NBA understands as a brand proposition that this is a very, like, this is a sport that in order to enjoy and participate in, you probably at least have to have some degree of quote unquote liberalism, you know, and then the NFA.
Yeah, and the numbers bear it out. The numbers bear it out. Like, if you look it up, the NBA viewer leans more progressive, tends to live in a city. All of those demographic numbers.
Unlike but then on the other hand, all Americans are parochial as hell. So it's interesting that it's like, oh, I get it. Like, we live it, like, this is, you know, we're a mosaic America. Like, wait, like, Jarab Kano, like, what? He's from Hungary. Like, excuse you. Like, it's very interesting. There's not like,
yeah, like we joked about earlier on our show on The Athletic, back to back, subscribed and all of that on iTunes and Spotify. Shameless plug, I know.
Please.
But today we joked about this kid Luka Doncic, Slovenian kid. He's 20 years old. He's basically, if you look at his numbers, he's probably the best 20-year-old NBA player who isn't LeBron James or Magic Johnson. That's literally it. Those are his only comps as a 20-year-old. That's how successful he's been. Super handsome, has a very flashy, likable game, super entertaining.
Tons of charisma.
All of those things that you would point to, people, but like, if he were from Indiana, forget about it. The hype machine, you would never stop hearing about this kid. Ever. But because he's Slovenian, like, white America shrugs and goes, he's got a weird name.
We're not going to get a strike on that, right?
We're not playing.
Okay. Yeah, we're just playing a little audio of watching Luka play a little bit. No, you're 100% right. If he was from Indiana, you never stop hearing about it. And that's like the interesting question is like, where does the next generation, because the NBA has always relied for every generation on these unbelievably charismatic players, but I don't know. Yeah, maybe if they're from Europe, people aren't interested.
I think there's a lot of charismatic guys, even after LeBron and them are completely gone. There's enough charisma, there's enough talent in the league. I think the league needs to just adjust how they've gone about, selling this game to the mass public, right? And I mentioned this earlier, and I think a lot of the reasons why they've been trying to push into China, trying to push into India, trying to push abroad to find new audiences, because the sell is way less complicated to a Chinese audience, right? Like, you don't have to deal with 400 years of black oppression in America, right? Like, Black Lives Matter or I Can't Breathe T-shirt means nothing to a kid or a young adult in China who just likes watching people dunk and shoot threes. And I think that's a big reason why you've seen them trying to find
Michael Jordan still means something to somebody in China. That's how powerful that brand is. Right.
Of course. So that's what I think a part of it is. You think about 2006 when they were in this place after the Malice in the Palace in Detroit where Ron Artest and Jermaine O'Neal and the Pacers are fighting fans in the stands, and David Stern enacts this reactionary ass dress code, which is basically like pick your pants up NBA players.
Yep.
You guys are fighting fans, and we're trying to sell this to a white audience. NBA is constantly always dealing with this issue, right? In the 80s and 70s, there was a perception that there was a bunch of guys who are thugs on the court, always fighting, and drugs, that they're doing drugs.
Right.
And so they're always fighting this race perception. And, you're just seeing that today, too.
Final couple of minutes. I watched The Irishman over break. I'm a big fan. I actually think them playing so much older than they are added to how kind of sad and haunting it was, to be honest. Like, and it worked so well that to me they clearly chose it to be intentional. Like, we're not going to be ridiculous. We're not going to try to fake something. This is obviously like events that are, they're being filtered through an old man's memory. Anyways, I think it's very, both in terms of all of like the thuggery around Trump, but also on the flip side, people thinking, Jesus Christ, there was like powerful labor that delivered for real people. You know what I mean? And cracked heads and wasn't totally, and that line where Pacino's like, corporate America and the government's at war against us. Well, sure, it had, there's other overlays with the Kennedys and organized crime and all of that. But big picture, that's true. That's the story of the last 40 years. I mean, that's the story basically 100%. A couple years after he disappears. What did you think?
Yeah, obviously, like you, I'm a big labor dork. I used to be a Teamster, actually, back when I used to work at UPS.
Yep.
So, the movie has special resonance for me. I know a lot of people... Well, there's been chat online about the ahistorical nature of the movie. I think if you're looking at this to be a documentary, you kind of don't get the point of the movie.
Right.
I loved it. I think it's a movie about just, some people might say it's nihilistic, it's like everything's pointless. I don't think it's about pointlessness. I think it's about just how inevitable life is, right? Like, inevitably, these battles, these wars, like, inevitably, you're going to die. Yep. You know, like, you can't be the Teamster president forever, right? Fat Tony can't be the king of the mob forever, right? Like, when the Frank Sheeran character is like, look, Fat Tony got locked up shortly thereafter. Tony Pro got locked up shortly thereafter. You know, Russ got locked up. Like, everybody's locked up. Nobody's enjoying this anymore. All these things that we fought and clawed for tooth and nail were basically a waste of our time. And in the meantime, I'm picking out my own casket, right?
Right.
I just think that the movie is just about, you know, life is basically about prioritizing, man. You got to figure out what's actually the most important shit. Relationship with my daughter, or, you know, becoming the union head of some local in New Jersey, right? Like, to me, it's like it's a movie about prioritization. I just thought it was genius the way they played some of that stuff, right? Where even Jimmy Hoffa was obviously somebody who did take time to sort of smell the flowers in life, right? Like, they show that with his ice cream addiction, or how he was actually able to have a meaningful relationship with Sharon's daughter. And, like, they were like, even that guy who's actually doing a lot of the life stuff, right, is sick in the head and can't let this union presidency thing go. I just thought it was fascinating, a fascinating just look at getting older and the passage of time and what it means to, like, look back on what you did with your life and, like, ultimately, did you do anything that mattered? I thought it was fantastic, dude. It was deeply moving.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that. I think you're 100% right, which is usually the case. Waz, we'll be back on Woke Bros very soon. You'll be back on TMBS very soon. Everybody, subscribe to all of the Athletic, Count the Dings properties. My God, get on Woke Bros. Follow Waz on Twitter. Follow Waz on Instagram. Waz, I appreciate you as always, man. Thank you so much.
Oh, man, thank you for having me on. Fun times as always. Matt, man, take the red hat off, man. Vote progressive in 2020, Matt. The people really need it.
I like that. Our old Matt is MAGA bit. I remember
Grishka, man. Good talking to you guys as always.
Actually, real quick, Waz, you remember when I had you on the Majority Report the first day I hosted after that asshole won in 2016? And I remember we were tweeting it out, and you were just like, I'm going to be on with Michael, da-da-da-da-da, hashtag MAGA.
That was absolutely a too soon moment, but, you know, such is life.
Such is life. All right, man. Appreciate you. Take care.
All right, later, y'all.
Later. All right, folks, we're going to take a real brief break. So I want to say a few things, you know, as I said, I think particularly, I don't remember the other stuff. Maybe Bolivia is probably the main thing that's that happened in the last couple of weeks in this interview. Slavoj Zizek is brilliant, fascinating, a mensch. One can and should have disagreements with everybody. We clearly need to inject more of that culture online and on the left. And watch and learn and engage with it. It's a lot of fun. And then we're going to go to the post game where we are going to talk with Luisa Ospina, who I'm incredibly excited to talk about. She's calling us. Really honored to be having her from Colombia. Debunk with Ben Burgess, some stuff on what's going on in Dominica, some Bernie talk, a whole bunch as always. Become a patron now, patreon.com/TMBS. We'll be right back in a few seconds with a conversation I did probably about 6-7 weeks ago with Slavoj Zizek. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now, and I have to say, just yesterday I interviewed Adolph Reed, which was always a pleasure and honor. And now I'm very happy to welcome to the program Slavoj Zizek. I have no doubt that you've heard of him. He's written...
I'm more happy than you to be at your show.
I love it. Please, everybody, look up Slavoj's new book, Sex and the Failed Absolute. Slavoj Zizek, thank you for being on TMBS.
Pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine.
In the former Yugoslavia, why did the authorities permit drug use?
It was part of a complicated, complex, and quite intelligent strategy. The same thing happened. It's interesting to learn. My Polish friends were telling me after Jaruzelski's coup d'etat in 1980, the idea was anything should be permitted just so that it keeps the younger generation especially depoliticized. So it was drugs, it was pornography, which was instantly legalized in ex-Yugoslavia in early 80s, and religious obscurantism, New Age, Oriental wisdom, meditation, and so on and so on. Anything goes just to keep the younger generation depoliticized. It was quite an interesting strategy, you know.
Did it work?
Not quite, but for some time it did, but not quite. But what is so interesting is how, and I think one should now approach it from a certain distance, how so-called really existing socialism effectively worked. It was a totally different strategy. You know, people in the West think we were brainwashed all the time into official propaganda. No, even those in power did not take the official propaganda seriously. And you know where we find the same thing, even in a harsher form, to go to actual events, not to get lost in old Yugoslav nostalgia. I'm now half prohibited in China because I signed some letters of protest. It's not so much Hong Kong, what goes on there. It's more Marxist students being arrested there. Yeah. Now, Xi, whatever you pronounce it, their president, on the one hand, tries to enforce a kind of a return to Marxism. You know, they are reprinting in hundreds of thousands of copies works of Marx, Lenin, Mao, blah, blah. But friends are telling me at the same time, it's considered extremely risky, even dangerous, if you actually read these works. Because then they're afraid it may happen what is now happening. Young students read this, say, okay, working class movement, what can we do for our workers? And they get connected then with many factories around Beijing, chemical factories where, of course, workers get poisoned and so on and so on. And this is the worst thing you can do in China today.
The worst thing you can do in China is actually read Marx. Even as
Marx, even some of Mao's texts and so on. Incidentally, this may interest your readers. I found so fascinating, it was today's or yesterday's news, how Chinese state agencies are now in a publicity offensive, warning the West. They are saying, you see, you supported Hong Kong unrest, now it's returning to you. You have also dissatisfaction unrest in Chile, in Spain, and so on and so on. What shocked me so much is that if you ignore the official rhetoric, they are really offering to those in power in the West a kind of solidarity pact. Their true message is, let's forget all the crap about socialism. We are in power, you are in power. Shouldn't we combat unrest and dissatisfaction together? It's a kind of a call to solidarity, of solidarity to those in power. It's very interesting.
Do you think when you look at the protests across the globe today, whether it be in Hong Kong or Chile or Haiti or Ecuador, do you think of the work that you did on Lenin and the different conceptions of freedom? Because it seems to me that some of the protests are about protecting liberal rights that have been established in Hong Kong, as an example. And I support them. I always say that. I would be incredibly hypocritical to sit in Brooklyn and oppose them. And then the others are economic.
I am well informed from friends in Hong Kong. You know that the version that we get in our media is not quite fair.
This is what
There
Pepe
was
Escobar
from the
told
beginning a clear class dimension. Those who began protesting in Hong Kong were mostly from not really poor, but nonetheless poorer sections. Their target were the new rich, Chinese rich who collaborate quite well with Chinese authorities and so on and so on. Only later they made this slight move into, all those stupidities. Trump save us, singing God Save the Queen, and so on and so on. But there is also a social dimension even there. Don't underestimate it.
There's
it's
a social dimension even there.
Protest. Yeah.
That's fascinating. What do you think? Are you as enthusiastic as all of the rest of us about Bernie Sanders in general, but also I'm very interested in what you think of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, and I would also put President Lula, who's a political prisoner, as voices of sort of social democratic policies, but actually of a certain kind of moral decency in the face of the decadent new right.
It's extremely important what you say now. I follow here somebody who is hated by much of the left today, unfortunately, in the United States, but I still deeply respect her. How do you pronounce her name? The one who wrote Kill All Normies.
Oh, Angela.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Her point is that today the alt-right is the one who appropriated this brutal mocking, obscenities, and so on and so on. And I think this is crucial what you said, theoretically even, when you said common decency and so on and so on. I think it's not too risky. Now the left has the unique chance to address all those ordinary people and so on and say, sorry guys, can't you see the postmodern obscenity, undermining of values, Christian values that you deplore so much? These guys are in power. We, the left, are the true moral majority. We are for the decency of the common man and so on and so on. It's a unique chance. My point would be that this is the true genius of Bernie Sanders. As somebody who is close to him, I always, as an old Stalinist, have underground contact there. He told me, Bernie's target are not these mid-level Democrats. He wants to get at those disappointed lower middle class people who otherwise would have voted for Trump. He targets exactly those. That's why it's so important. I almost cried when the squad, Alexandria, Octavio Cortez, and so on, when they decided to support Bernie for purely generational reasons. So that it's not just this young, feminist, gay rights generation. My formula of paradise is this younger, radical generation connected with the representative of precisely old white men. Bernie is an old white man, and it should be a proof to all of us that we should fight for them. They should be our allies. My last point here, don't be afraid, I will not get lost, is that I agree with what you said before, social democratic politics and so on and so on. And that's crucial. Look closely at the program of Bernie, even what Lula did, and Jeremy Corbyn and so on. Measure it with standards of what went on in Europe half a century ago, at that high point of welfare state. Well, compare Bernie Sanders' program with Swedish social democracy, Olof Palme and so on. He is much more modest than they. So here we can measure the state of things today. What half a century ago in Europe was the standard moderate, even social democracy, is now considered as one way to Venezuela or whatever you call it, and so on. That's why I think we should fully support them, although we should also criticize them. By them, I mean not so much Bernie as Corbyn. But that's another specific point. I think that the way Labour Party is managing Brexit is catastrophic. At the end, I predict Boris Johnson may win. But generally, I think today we don't have to be extra radical. We don't have to support Bernie with this secret manipulative calculation. Yeah, he's the first step. Then we will grab power, introduce some socialism. No, just be sincerely for Bernie. It's enough.
Mm-hmm. You know, it reminds me of what you're talking about with because and I think it's a distinction we're going to have to draw strategically. I was talking about this with Adolph Reed. I mean, it becomes really quite simple because the common decency, of course, also actually cuts across. People think that it's only in certain areas that people support, as an example, equity for gay, lesbian, and transgender people. Yeah, that's totally false. And I'm always reminded of this very interesting study that was released. And if I remember it correctly, I'll paraphrase it. But most Americans across all groups didn't like political correctness. And what they meant by they broke it down. Conservatives meant civil rights and so on because they opposed that. But other Americans just meant they just meant basically being uptight and complaining about comedy and having speech codes and all of this sort of thing. There was one other thing, though, in the study that was even more unpopular than political correctness, and that was hate speech. And that to me was like, right, this is exactly where people actually are. You can persuade them on the grounds of justice, decency, and equity. That has a very broad appeal outside of the specific cultural manifestations of different sorts of politics, not as a matter of substance, but as a matter of style, really.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you, and I will even give a slightly different, but in accordance with your point to it. You know, often in politics, who was the writer who said this? I think Kurt Vonnegut. He said we should be very careful with appearances because appearances are ultimately all that we have. In politics, there is always a substance in style, you know, because style is the way we do what we do. And politics is never simply neutral, like we want that goal and then you can kill, lie, whatever for that goal. No, the goal must be realized already in the very way you are doing it. That's why I think it's crucial what you say. And to be quite open here, my critical remarks against political correctness, of course, do not, absolutely not, target their goals and so on. Right. It's just, I sometimes feel that the approach, the way they do it, these tight regulations, the spirit of suspicion, horror at humor, always this obsession, my God, if I use that expression, who will be hurt, and so on and so on. I will give you, just so that I don't get lost, a simple example. Sometimes I am criticized as being insensitive to race or even Islamophobic and so on, but I noticed that these reproaches never came to me from these groups allegedly offended by me. I learned just now that my Against Double Blackmail book that was translated in pirated editions in Lebanon and in Egypt, is very popular then. They are inviting me there. They like me there. I am in permanent contact with radical black circles in New York, the other side of where you are, which means Newark and so on, where they have now Baraka, a radical black mayor and so on. I have very good relations with them. It's typical how white liberals worry, will they be offended and so on. My God, allow them. Whenever I have contacts with this group, I discover that they can immediately differentiate between, or I will call them, it may be problematic to some people, ordinary obscenities, which are just a way to break the ice and to establish a true contact. They can immediately distinguish. I never had a problem between this and true offensiveness.
In the debate, Can I just jump in? Because this is interesting to me. In the debate with Jordan Peterson, you actually critiqued some of this white, politically correct attitude on very interesting grounds, because it was psychoanalytic as I read it, but you also said what you're actually doing here, whether you're being, whether you're just being MAGA, which is just being a racist and so on, or see, I'm mimicking your speech patterns now, or if you're in that woke mode, but either way, you're centering yourself as the universal subject and everything is filtering through your comfort system, not a genuine multiplicity.
Yes, that's now you put it wonderfully, because what always makes me suspicious when I listen to these anti-racist white liberals is how in all the self-denigration, yes, we white, we are responsible for everything, colonialism, sexism, murder, and so on, ethnic cleansing, and so on. At the same time, while renouncing their identity, and while fully supporting the identity of others, there is a racist trick in it. White liberals like blacks, Native Americans, and so on, to develop their cultural identity. No, they should be allowed to do more, to define their own universality. White liberals secretly reserve the universal dimension for them.
Right.
They like the others to be particular. Isn't it wonderful to have Native Americans singing their song, dances, their food, and so on and so on? That's why, as you may have heard or read, my hero, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I did read him. One of my heroes is Malcolm X. He saw this very clearly. His point of X is we blacks were, by being torn out of our communal space in Africa, we were deprived of our particular identity, our roots. And his point is not, let's fill in this X with a new identity. His point is explicitly, this X, the lack of particular identity, gives us blacks a unique chance to propose our own universalism, which will be more radical and better than white man's universalism.
And I want to just add one other example that I used recently for a book that I just finished, actually. And this is a great liberal economist, Amartya Sen, who, development is freedom and so on. And he went in the 1990s, he argued against the authoritarian governments in Malaysia and Singapore because they said we have Asian values, and that meant we don't allow freedom of assembly and speech and so on. And then what he said is there are two positions. There are Western liberals who say the rest of the world needs to mimic the West in order to have democracy and human rights. Then these despot in Malaysia says, no, because we have our own culture. What Sen did is he said, of course, democracy and human rights are universal, and they are found in the universalities of any tradition on earth. And that's the work.
Absolutely, which means also that, you put it very nicely, which also means that against those who criticize me of subscribing to Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, no, on the contrary, mockingly, I called the thesis of Clash of Civilizations today's, how do you call that disease? Huntington disease or whatever. No, my point is, that's my message to my Arab friends, Jewish friends, wherever, blacks, Latino Americans. We have our fight here in the West. You have your own fight. It's not for us to teach you. It's for all of us to find a way to connect our fight with your fight. It must always be potentially a universal fight. So there is a clash within each civilization. And I'm here, sometimes ironically sounding as Eurocentric. By this I mean the following. Yes, Europe is colonialism and so on. But sorry, in European tradition, also a certain emancipatory legacy is present, and it is on the basis of this legacy that we can today develop a very brutal and justified criticism of everything that is wrong in European tradition. So we should not be afraid to say, yes, we have our own tradition, which is in itself split. There is a clash in our tradition. And I'm well aware how this clash is at work in other traditions. For example, when I was in India, I discovered a total split between official side, and this is in India, not only Modi and this neo-Hinduist, but even some cultural theorists and so on who play Indian identity and a much stronger political and cultural movement for universalization to use concrete names. It's not just the Gandhi tradition. There is also a key figure in modern India, Ambedkar, who was for universalism, who said the defeat of Buddhism, because he saw in Buddhism a much greater potential for universalism.
Because he was low caste, so he embraced Buddhism to reject the caste system.
Yeah, you have this, while Gandhi, he was here very ambiguous. He said they are all children of God. But this didn't mean let's abolish castes. This means just let's acknowledge the decency and the proper place to each of the castes. Sorry, this is not enough today.
Right.
And in every culture we can find something like this.
It reminds me also of how C.L.R. James, in one of my favorite books, Black Jacobins, he said the Haitian Revolution is not only universal and, of course, a defeat of Western imperialism, colonialism, but it's also the fulfillment. It's the highest expression of the French Revolution.
Absolutely. You put it so nicely, and I closely study. I know I've read books and so on the Haiti Revolution. I even proposed this thesis that it's only through the Haiti Revolution, because Haitians consciously refer to French Revolution, they conceive themselves just as the expansion, actualization of the French Revolution. But I claim it's only through Haiti Revolution that the French Revolution became a truly universal world historical event. Without that, it would be just some European thing. But you know what's so interesting? How this was too much, unfortunately, even for the so-called left wing of the founding fathers of the United States. Even Thomas Jefferson, unfortunately, said some very stupid things against Toussaint Louverture.
Of course,
he was
not universal, to say the least. Why do you think Labour is messing up Brexit?
I think they are split between two opposing views. One is, and I'm more inclined towards the first view. One is that nonetheless, Europe guaranteed certain ecological, even regulation of work, healthcare, and so on standards. And I think there are good arguments for this work. I don't believe this image of, Brussels center, kind of gigantic bureaucratic machine, which is just sabotaging the progressive reforms. Listen, a friend of mine looked into the history of the conflict between Central European bureaucracy and British government. And if you look at this conflict, you see that I'm almost all the time on the side of Brussels. For example, under Blair government, Brussels wanted to have to determine all around Europe a minimum of vacancies, holiday, free time each worker we employed has to have, and a maximum of working hours per week. Protection of workers' rights. British government, Blair government, opposed it, claiming this will limit our competitivity and so on and so on. Then there were ecological measures and so on and so on. So this is one view. The other view, and I'm afraid some people in British Labour Party still subscribe to this view. The other view is that if Britain gets rid of the control of Brussels bureaucracy, it will be able to impose more radical pro-workers policy and so on and so on. I think not. I think it's clear from what is happening now that, and Boris Johnson is fully aware of this, that Brexit means that United Kingdom will be much more depending on the United States. This is my pessimist
view. Is it? So it's like Singapore, not Sweden.
Sorry?
It's like Singapore, not Sweden.
Yes, precisely. Yes, because but you know what's the problem? Let me now add something very pessimist. It's very sad what I will say. Do you know that I've seen the video? Do you know when Deng Xiaoping began his reforms, he visited Singapore and was so fascinated that he said, this should be a model for all China, Singapore. But you know what's so sad? When right-wingers say communism failed and so on, let's admit it. What the Chinese succeeded in the last 40 years is probably the most explosive economic development in the history of humanity. But how did they do it? By combining two things which were the true horror of the 20th century left everywhere. On the one hand, brutal, the most brutal market competition. On the other hand, strong authoritarian state. So the problem with Singapore model is that at a certain level, it works. So we have to be, I'm totally opposed to it. I think this is a nightmare scenario. I think Singapore is the first sign where the world is moving today. Global market, but at the same time, strong authoritarian nationalist regimes and so on and so on. From Putin to China, to India, to Turkey, and now even to the United States. So again, it's the crucial question, what I miss in today's left. And that's why I like the left, which does not just criticize, but as Bernie is doing, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is doing, but they're experimenting with different models. What to do with healthcare, what to do with this, with that. It's absolutely important for the left to develop alternate models. I think this is the true tragedy, I will be very open here, of Venezuela. It's not just, although it is mostly American meddling. It's clear that what Chavez, while he was still in power, tried to do was maybe good, but he didn't really invent an alternate model that would be functioning. I'm not saying nothing works here. For example, if you ask me, I still think that an authentic success story, that's why you don't read a lot about it in the newspapers, is Bolivia.
Yep.
They are just slowly doing it in a very reasonable way, but nonetheless, a great amount of emancipatory measures and so on and so on. You see, this is the left that I like.
I have to say, Slavoj, really quick, because I want to ask you two other things about this. But
please,
what
interrupt me. I need a sadomaso mistress woman, you know.
I just read the Financial Times profile of Evo Morales from a couple of days ago before the election. And it was interesting because for the Financial Times, it was quite sympathetic. And what I do like, I always appreciate that leaders like Evo and Lula, they do, in fact, defeat so much stereotypes and so much bullshit in our narratives just simply by their success and existence. And Evo had one point in the article where he's talking with and he's campaigning, they're eating pork together, he's very much a man of the people. But then he looked and he said, well, what I've learned is fiscal management is very important. He said something that sounded like a banker on the top of cutting poverty in half and earning global respect.
But again, the left, that's what I like. And don't forget another person. I know him personally. We are even kind of friends. The true genius behind, I'm not denigrating Evo, is Alvaro Garcia Linera, the vice president. You should invite him once, my God. A very good theoretician, and he has no illusions. For example, all that bullshit of let's return to pre-modern traditions, old tribal councils, old Latino American native wisdoms. He has no illusions. He told me, yes, we did this. We have tribal representatives in La Paz with the government. But he said this can also open up another path of corruption and so on and so on. They are very realist. That's the left that I like. At the same time, radical left. They do certain measures which hurt and so on and so on. But at the same time, pragmatic, but not in the sense of dirty compromises, but in the sense of this basic responsibility. They know we are now in power. People don't expect from us just big phrases and so on. They expect better life at everyday level and so on and so on. Because, I'm getting in my old age sick and tired of these big events like Tahrir Square, Syntagma Square, 1 million people on the street. Yeah. My question is, what happens the morning after when this drunkenness with big events is over? How do ordinary people feel the change when things return to normal? Don't you agree that this is the crucial test?
Absolutely. Well, not only is that the crucial test, a lot of those events which have been so inspiring and people have risked so much to do, they end up, this is the situation in some ways right now in Sudan. There's incredible physical bravery, extraordinary organizing. And then what happens is Bashir is gone. That's great. But essentially, it's a coup. Now, the people are smart enough and strategic and brave enough to stay on the street because they know it's a coup. But there still isn't that fundamental sort of shift.
And the model for this is, for me, for example, what happened with so-called Arab Spring in Egypt. Yes, they got democracy and they got Muslim brothers in power. And now all my friends are telling me the Sisi regime, the only thing I like about Sisi, it's his name, which indicates what he is. Sorry for the vulgarity. I never can
I was missing the vulgarity, actually. I was expecting more.
The Sisi regime, they claim, is, even from the purely liberal standpoint of human rights debate, much worse than Mubarak. Under Mubarak, leftist opposition was allowed. There were some small, very critical, even Marxist journals, and so it was modest. But now the situation, standard of living is lower. There is more poverty, and so on and so on. It's you see we. But now I will say a thing which will probably be problematic for you, maybe even. It costs me a lot when I say this. Let's not patronize so-called ordinary people. That's my problem with populism. I don't trust this old Maoist slogan, go to the people, mix with ordinary people. In Mao's case, this was farmers, learn from them, and so on. Now we are in such a complex, crazy situation that I'm not saying we intellectuals know it, but you will not get an answer simply from ordinary people. Take ecology. What to do? It's a big mess. We don't know what to do. We will not learn the answer simply listening to the ordinary people. I don't denigrate them. I respect them. But they are confused. They are at a loss. They lack orientation. And here, I'm saying this with certain arrogance, and I don't mean me, I mean generally, I cannot do this, namely, we intellectuals have to provide a vision. People need leaders, not in the authoritarian sense. I almost always emphasize this distinction. A true leader is not the one who knows better than you what do you want. A true leader is the one who makes you aware of what you are able of your freedoms. The true leader's message is, yes, you can, but not in the Obama sense.
I was going to say.
Yes, yeah, you can reach.
You want to revise Obama for the modern age.
Yeah, but you know what was the truth of Obama? Do you remember that wonderful play with words? How yes, we can became yes, we can. Through scanning and so on. The last thing, if I'm allowed, then you can cut me short. That's why, not that I have, my God, he's a subhuman entity, Trump, but I am not so at ease as it may appear with these impeachment attempts, not because Trump is beneath contempt. My point is this one. What if we learned anything from great whistleblowers like Penning, Assange, Snowden?
Yeah.
Sorry. It's that the true threat to our freedoms does not come from evil, corrupted individuals who twist their state power for their own interest and so on. The true evil, by evil I simply mean new forms of servitude, control, domination, are inscribed into the very functioning of our state machinery apparatuses. For example, what NSA is doing, connected with Facebook, Google, and so on and so on. An incredible new network of social control and manipulation is emerging here. So don't make things easier and focus just on corrupted individuals. The true task today is to discern the unfreedom embodied in how our state apparatuses function. That's why I don't like this easy story, oh, corrupted Trump. No, ultimately the problem is not corrupted Trump. Again, my problem with just focusing on Trump is double. First, it's not him, it's the system. And point two, I never trusted that liberal mocking Trump, jerk, idiot, and so on. The big question is, what was wrong with our liberal societies that it gave birth to horror like Trump? Trump didn't fall from the moon. Trump exploited certain inconsistencies, antagonisms, which are already here, which are inherent to the predominant liberal vision. So my point is to really get rid of Trump. We, on the side of freedom, dignity, human rights, have to move a little bit further to the left. And
that's what Bernie says. That's what Bernie says that in every speech.
Here, Bernie is right against those Biden-type conformists claim, let's not move too much to the left. We must occupy the center. But my main argument against this is Trump himself. Trump won precisely by pushing things to the extreme on his side. Even the Republican establishment thought Trump is unelectable. You remember, almost all the great established name of Republican Party said Bush older, Bush younger, and so on. They all said we will vote for Hillary, and so on. And it didn't work. So let's not, that sometimes the paradox of politics is to get real majority, the path is not let's be in the middle compromise, but to radicalize things a little bit. Here, true politics begins.
To reshift the playing field. And also I would, and I also really, well, just two more things, because we only have a couple of minutes left, but I just also think the other thing that's so important is that his vulgarity and
Trump's, you mean?
Yeah, Trump's vulgarity, and he's grotesque and he's evil and he's vulgar and all the rest, every adjective, and even people like me recommend, supported Clinton over him to, and all the rest of it. The fact that he is also quite funny, if the only option that in a television and entertainment space, if the option is fake non-substantive moralism and appeals to discredited sort of public reaffirmations of decency and all the stuff that people know is bullshit next to a guy who's incredibly funny and bizarre, again, the only alternative to me actually goes back to not matching it with its own thing on the left, as funny as it would be, but the fundamental decency we talked about in the beginning, and that's Sanders again.
Yes, but at the same time, I would also say that, one should really study Trump to learn how all these vulgarities and so on, these are parts of his working class appeal. This is how he establishes contact with ordinary people and so on. One has to beat him here, not with some kind of a high manners liberalism and so on and so on. That's Trump's strength. I think that the way to do it is not to make only fun of Trump's vulgarities, because he's not vulgar all the way through. For example, when he, and this is for me Trump at his most disgusting, doesn't he usually at his shows when he speaks to his partisans, followers, embrace the American flag and so on and so on?
Right.
You know, one should focus on points where he wants to appear sincere.
Yes.
Now I'm really patriotic. And here he's the most ridiculous. One should make fun of him there, not when he uses vulgarities and so on and so on.
Although it would be funny if Bernie said that he wasn't well endowed. I would go for that.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I know. No, but again, I think that the situation in the United States and in Europe, we are no better. What is happening now in Europe?
Right.
It's so serious that, you know, it's not just a question of one elections and so on. I think the way things are appearing now, if he will not be destroyed by this impeachment, then Trump may well get re-elected. And the nightmare is this one. Let's say Trump is impeached. Whom do we get then? Your vice president, which is, I'm almost more afraid of him, if you ask me.
He might be easier to beat, though. I just want to say, all right, one final question, and I hope, first of all, I hope you will join us again in the future. But,
whenever you want.
And I want to just tell everybody, if you've watched this far, no, I will not be asking Slavoj about the Joker. I don't care. But what I really do want to know is...
Okay, I agree, because this is not a big theoretical... Sorry, this is not a big political point, Joker. It's just a theoretical point about why I don't believe in... I'm not sure how to read the film, but most of my friends read it as providing a kind of social, psychological genesis of Joker. I don't think this is the right approach. On the other hand, I have a certain, as I said on that Chapo appearance of mine, a certain, you know what I like in Joker? That all figures of authority, hypocritically, like to point out, we are one thing publicly, but privately we are warm persons and so on and so on. Joker is just his mask. There is nothing beneath his mask. No warm human person and so on and so on. And this is for me the moment of truth. All totalitarian leaders, Stalin, Hitler, played the opposite game. You know, I do cruel thing on behalf of the big cause I'm standing for, but privately I like cats, I like small children, I'm a good guy. No, there is no warm human inner side. You know why I like this? Just to conclude, because I don't believe in this stupidity of to understand the situation, you have to understand the other. How do they see it? One of the most, I often repeat this stupid multicultural saying that I know is the one of an enemy is the person to whose story we were not ready to listen. I say, hello, are you serious? So Hitler was our enemy because we were not ready to listen to his story. I think that if we can learn anything from 20th century history, is that all horrible terrorist regimes were always able to construct a wonderful, sincere, poetic, religious story to justify their horrors. This is not the truth. The truth is in what you do publicly, not in the beautiful poems and so on you invent to justify it.
What, and the final question, I read your piece you just put up about Rojava, and do you have a message of solidarity for Rojava and the Kurds?
Absolutely, because you know why? Because as I wrote there, of course, they are not angels in the sense of purity. They have their own corruption, struggles, and so on. But I follow the situation very closely there. What shocked me is that whenever they were given a little bit of a breathing space, they did incredible things. People attacked me because in that article that you were kind enough to mention, I talk also about the Kurdish feminism. They say, ha, are you kidding? No, I'm not. Do you remember it was even in our media when Kurds from Rojava region were fighting ISIS? the key role was played by feminine soldiers and so on. It's unique in the Middle East and so on. Even, I know the situation in detail, the imprisoned Öcalan, leader of Turkish Kurds, you know that in prison he turned a feminist now. He proposes this sexual openness to other sex practices, women's well, and so on and so on. They're an absolutely incredible phenomenon. The only glimmer of hope in that area where all other stations around are again just drowning in their patriotic, national, totally corrupted sovereignty, let's call them Turkey, Iraq, Syria. They are the only glimmer of hope, and of course, they will probably be destroyed.
And forgive me, I just want to add, there's another echo of it, and that is actually the Kurdish HDP political party in Turkey, who broadened out a social democratic base, ecological, feminist, and labor. They performed well. Now they're political prisoners in Erdogan's Turkey, and it echoes exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, but isn't this a nice paradox? Because as I said in the text of mine, we perceive automatically, because we were fed by these stories, Kurds had some primitive tribal part. No, they are the most secular, modern part of Turkish society. It's incredible, I mean.
Slavoj Zizek, thank you so much. I hope you'll do this again with us, maybe
and
even
I hope
in studio.
I will do it face to face, not through this stupid media and so on. I would love to visit you. I like Brooklyn. You know why? Because in some part of Brooklyn, you have now where there are all those new skyscrapers and so on. They opened there another Katz restaurant. And you get the best matzo ball soup there. I don't like Jewish food in Israel. It's the same cheap as the Arab food. Hummus, all that bullshit. I like Eastern European Jewish food. Matzo ball and so on.
You like the real thing. You like the knishes. You like the real shit.
Yeah. Yep. And you can get it better one than on Manhattan. You get it in Brooklyn. So I'm with you.
Okay, brother. Well, I'll see you soon.
If we do a talk there, I invite you to matzo ball.
Beautiful. Let's do it. I'm going to hold you to it. Slavoj,
okay, thanks very much.
I hope you enjoyed this. This was so much fun.
I did. It's a breath of fresh air again. I'm ill in a bad mood, and I was able to forget for 45 minutes the misery of my existence here now.
That's the highest of compliments. You just watched a mic.
All right, folks.
Oh, wait. All right, folks. That was so much fun. I can't wait to have him on again. Okay. Become a patron today. Patreon.com/TMBS. That is the foundational thing. We rely 99.999% on you to do all of this, which we are so committed to. Patreon.com/TMBS. If you haven't subbed yet, click subscribe now. Apparently 40% of you watch but don't subscribe. So I want you to not only click subscribe, also click the bell button so you get notified about all of the live streams that we do. We're going to have a little bit of a different post game. Of course, we're going to have a debunk with Ben Burgess. We've got some stories to cover, including this great Navarra media video on medical costs, the just ever abundant ignoring of Bernie, some new interesting collusion influence from the U.S. in the case, well, now, of course, the free leader, President Lula, an amazing Cornel West throwback. But
for this this Lula interference thing, we should give a challenge, and we can do it in the post game. But when you share the video for it, do a hashtag resistance, and let's try to get all those people on board with our left-wing foreign policy projects.
Exactly. There was a good piece in Politico, which we'll talk about in the post game, showing. Well, I mean, it's framed in a dumb way. Of course, obviously, Bernie had the. Not even just infinitely better than Warren foreign policy, just different thing foreign policy. But it's starting to track.
Warren has a Democrats foreign policy,
which is trash.
Yeah, exactly.
And not only is it trash, it is specifically, ironically, it is totally unequipped to defeat the global far right tide that resistance types claim to be concerned about. So we'll get to that, but we're also going to be talking with Luisa Ospina, who is a Colombian political activist, trade unionist on the strikes that just were taking place there. A contact reached out from Colombia to facilitate this interview. I am learning about her work and the strike, and I'm very excited for this conversation. So we'll do that in the first few minutes of the post game. Become a patron today. Snag your tickets to the Bell House if you're a patron February 7th. Very excited for our next live show. This Sunday, what do we have for this Sunday? Oh, this Sunday, we're actually going in depth on Egypt, which we've been needing to do for a while. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate all of you. See you in a few minutes in the postgame.